The problem is that if you don't dive into the pain, if you don't work through it, bulldoze your fear, you don't find the healing. And if you really want the relationships, even with your own self, you have to do the work. Yes, it sucks. I'm not going to lie. It is not an easy thing to dive into your pain, but the freedom from it on the other side and being able to take your power back from whatever it was that hurt you is priceless.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney Ann Jenkins. Hello, and welcome to the 70th episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This week, I have with me Susan Snow. On Halloween night in 1985, Susan Williams Snow's life changed forever when her father, LAPD detective Thomas C. Williams, was ambushed and killed. Her compelling story of her family's loss and the road to her recovery from trauma provides hope and practical guidance for others who have been touched by violence and loss. Susan reclaimed her life, learned how to manage her PTSD, and found a path to vulnerability with courage, loss without victimhood, and love with forgiveness. And she has written a book to share her story. Susan and I had a really deep dive conversation about her experience from being involved in a tragic event to healing her trauma and the process of writing a book to help her through and now be able to help others who might be struggling. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in this episode, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it. So here is Susan. The podcast focuses a lot on the inner authentic voice. And you, as a speaker, had to go through a lot of things in your life in order to be able to guide other people to listen to their intuition through healing and journeys and that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So when is the first time that you realized that you had an inner voice of your own and you were able to connect to it and identify it?
Oh my gosh. Well, I it took me a really long time and a lot of therapy. Um I didn't write my book um until I was 50 years old. I'm 55 now. And it took me 4.5 years to do it. Before that, I just felt like I always knew that there was something bigger than myself
Mhm.
that was going to come out of the trauma that I experienced. And I think the most of it came out when I was actually writing the book. And I realized that as I was diving and reliving and feeling all of the emotions, that my words could be a teaching moment for others. So writing the book was obviously cathartic for me and for my family, my immediate family. And um on the other side of that though, I was very fearful just because I had many fears. One was fear of being out there
Mhm.
due to my situation. The other one was being authentic and vulnerable. Um, you have to not only tell your story, but you end up telling others' stories in the process. And I knew that, for instance, the relationship with my mother could either go badly
Right.
or it could start a conversation. and maybe even a healing. And so there was that fear. Um, and as I continued to write, I just kept thinking about all the people out there that felt like me for many years who didn't know where to start to heal. And I felt like this could be my way of helping people to start that process or think differently about whatever trauma loss that they had. And so that's kind of where it was a big epiphany for me. And I have a saying where I tell people to bulldoze your fear because fear will hold you back from everything.
Yeah.
And it will keep you from being authentic. It will keep you from being vulnerable, right? And as scary as it is, when I am able to be vulnerable and authentic with another person, it's like giving them license to be so themselves, you know? So
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's, so that's, and I think that's my purpose out of all of this. That is my purpose.
Yeah, and I want to give you like so much credit for being brave enough to look at all of this stuff because a lot of people will never look at that in their lifetime. So it's like a really big accomplishment to even like look at it in the first place.
Thank you.
And so I don't want to talk about anything that you're uncomfortable with, but just so the listeners are aware of the trauma that you experienced, and which resulted in the book that you were writing. I don't know what you would like to share about it, but you're welcome to share anything.
I'm an I'm an open book, no pun intended. I talk about this all the time. I am the daughter of a Los Angeles police detective who was ambushed and murdered on Halloween night of 1985 while he was picking my then 6-year-old brother up from school. My mom and I were called to the school and we witnessed his body in the aftermath.
Mm,
And everything that happened after that um, was the start of my journey.
right.
So, I went from being a normal teenage girl at 17, I was 17 at the time, and I had a very close relationship with my father. My father was, and I love talking about him because there was so much emphasis on him, the cop, for so long
Mhm.
that now that I'm speaking, I like to tell people what he was like as a father and as a human. Um, he was a very present father. And he when he talked to you, he always made you feel like you were the most important person in that room. And
Yeah.
anyone that I have ever had a conversation with, whether it's a professional colleague of his or someone he trained or a personal friend, has told me the same thing. He had a very kind demeanor. But on the other side of that, he was a cop's cop. Like he was straight and narrow, follow the book, and and I loved that about him. He was when he did something 120%. So even when my dad was killed, he was coaching my little brother's soccer team, and he had no idea how to coach a soccer team. But he went out and he got the books and he read up and interviewed other coaches and, because he didn't want to embarrass his son and he wanted to make sure that he was doing that job at 120%. So, um, when I lost him, Being a detective, um, when he was a street cop, I was always worried that something, I was little, I was younger.
Mhm.
I was always worried that daddy would get hurt, you know. Killed didn't come into my picture, right? And as he got older and I got older, and he became a detective, I had this false sense of security.
Yeah.
And because now dad has, like, in my mind, he has a desk job. Like, he's not in any danger. And that night just completely ripped my world apart because unbeknownst to us, we were the original target. So, you know, it just, my life turned into something that I wouldn't wish on anyone that night. And
Yeah.
being 17, being at 1985, there was no talk of mental health.
Oh, yeah.
There was no talk of PTSD. There was no, you know, resources for teenagers. And I had, initially, when my mom and I first were there, um, I saw what I saw, but I didn't realize, like, your brain just fractures a bit. I saw an ambulance and I saw police officers walking around and they were crying, and it still was not connecting.
Yeah.
And when I was sitting in an office in the school, my mom had been taken away, um, I'm assuming to be with my brother and some detectives, and I was sitting there just trying to wrap my head around what I just saw. And it still was not connecting. I kept thinking, there's an ambulance out there. Why aren't they helping him? That was my mindset.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I heard two women who worked at the school speaking to each other, and one of them said that Mr. Williams is deceased. And that's when it just hit me in the face. And I realized he was gone. And I just wanted to get up out of that chair and run. I didn't know where I was running, but I was just going to run, right? And just run away, do a Forrest Gump, just keep running. And the problem was is that my body was not cooperating with that.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't move. And my mom came up to me and said, I'm sending you with a neighbor." And even though I wanted to run, I wanted to be with my family.
Right. Yeah.
And so I did go with a neighbor, and I was trying to navigate all of these motions by myself. And I had a boyfriend at the time. He's now my husband. And the neighbor called him, and she didn't tell him too much. So when he came, um, he just thought I had to go to the hospital, and my dad was at the hospital somewhere.
Oh.
So he showed up and he's, get your coat. This is the evening time. Get your coat. We're going to go to the hospital. What hospital is he at? Where's your mom? Where's your brother? That kind of thing. And just being concerned. We had only been dating 3 months, and the words could not come out of my mouth because if I said them, it was real. And so I kind of, I just was frozen. And all of a sudden it blurted out of my mouth and I said, he's gone. And, my boyfriend was like, what do you mean he's gone? And I said, he's gone. He's not at a hospital. He's gone. And it was the first time I ever saw my husband drop to his knees. You know, I just watched my mother do it. And now I'm watching my boyfriend do it. And it was just devastating, you know? And I think one of the things that I always talk about is the fact that, we were both kids. He was 19, I was 17. Neither one of us knew how to navigate all of this stuff, you know? Most boys at 19 would have said, "Oh, this is way too much. I'm
Right.
out.
Mhm. Yeah.
I,
Right.
I'm out. Like, I can't, no, you know?" Uh, m- but my boyfriend, my husband, he didn't, and he stayed with me. And I was grateful for that in that moment because I didn't have anybody. My poor neighbor knew my parents, and she was trying to, like, she was in shock, right? And
Right.
she's trying, as an adult, trying to navigate her own emotions. And now she has his daughter in her living room,
Mhm.
right? And so, yeah, I mean, that just, that started it. And we lived in a pretty quiet neighborhood, and it became crazy. We had police officers everywhere. They didn't find the guys for 6 days. So, and unbeknownst to us, we were a target as well. So and that didn't come out until the trial. But, we had this detail in the front yard, in the backyard. We had helicopters. I had bodyguards anytime I went anywhere, if I went anywhere. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So not only were you trying to understand your own emotions, like it was a very public facing
it
event.
was
Yeah.
all over the media.
Yeah.
The unfortunate part was that even, and so be it. I mean, my brother watched his dad get murdered. My dad's last thing that he did on earth was to save his son. He told my brother to duck down in the truck as he knew it was going to happen. And, you know, all the focus obviously was on him and my mother and my dad. And I I mean, even the media, it took them 2 days to figure out he had a 17-year-old daughter. And so I just didn't feel I felt very alone at that time, and I felt like I wasn't important.
Yeah.
And it was and that was a really hard, that was like trauma on top of trauma,
Mhm.
you know? Although I didn't know that at the time,
Mhm.
many years later, I'm
Yeah.
discovering this.
Yeah, absolutely. And like as a teenage girl, what was your relationship like with your mother before that? You don't have to talk about this if you don't want to.
Oh, no, it's
Um,
totally fine. It's totally fine. My mom and I, we were strained prior to my dad's death. And, you know, unfortunately, my mom has a narcissistic personality. And I didn't know that until many years later, too. But, um, and I don't fault her, right, for sending me away that night, or not, like, she just kind of turtled, and it was all about her from the get-go. Um, and then she started to drink. So people deal with trauma and loss in different ways. And I don't fault people. Like, it's just the human condition. We're
right.
we're going to do something, right? However, her actions had consequences with me and my experiences. And when I talked about being authentic and being vulnerable in my book and having to tell my truth, that's what I said. Like, I had to tell her truth as well. Um, but we were strained, and my dad was always kind of the mediator,
Yeah.
you know? He was the voice of reason when it came to our relationship, the
Mhm.
relationship between my mother and I.
Right. So you In order for you to heal, you didn't have a lot of resources available to you.
Right.
Um, and so you had to get to the place of healing somehow. So, like, what was it that was guiding you to get to that place?
Nothing. I mean, and I'm totally honest about that. So I tell the story and people go, "What?" So, um, about a month after my dad was killed, LAPD came to my mom and said, "We wanna pay for some therapy for you guys." And I didn't know what therapy was. And in my mind, if you went to a shrink, you were crazy, right? But at the time, I was living in a fog, and I was literally like, people would just push me in the direction they needed me to go, and I just went. And that was just, I was no longer living. I was just existing, right? Um, I went to this therapist, and I, in hindsight, don't think that I don't know if he was qualified, educated enough, or didn't want to handle the amount of trauma. And so our sessions were very general. They were very
Mm,
shallow. And all he ever wanted to talk about was my relationship with my mother, my relationship with my brother, my boyfriend in school. And at this point of seeing him, I am having all of the things that can come with PTSD. I was anxious.
mhm,
I had severe depression. I didn't want to get up out of bed every day. I didn't like, if I took a shower, it was like everything in my being, right? To be
mhm.
able to have the energy.
Right.
Um, I wasn't sleeping. I had suicidal ideation, although then I didn't know what that meant, but I was longing to be with my dad.
Mhm,
And every session was so general, but every time I went, I was like, today's the day. Today's the day. He's going to say something, do something, and make me feel better. And it never happened. And after a year of seeing this man, he looked at me one day and he said, "You know what, Susan, you are a well rounded young lady and you're going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I don't need to see you anymore." And I was like, "Oh, what? What? What?" Like, I'm a mess, man. Like, but being a kid, being 17, not knowing about mental health, I didn't know how to verbalize all the things that were going on.
mhm.
And so him not asking, me not verbalizing, right? It didn't go anywhere. So my mindset after that was that I had just snapped. I was crazy, and this is just something I'm going to be dealing with for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to have to figure it out. Clearly nobody, even a professional, can fix me. And I
Oh,
did for 14 years. I I just went through all the things, and
mm,
there are times where I'm surprised I'm here,
mhm,
you know? Um, and I will tell you that, there was just days where I did wanna take my own life, and I would just look at my boyfriend, who's my husband, and just focus on him sometimes. Um, and then I became a mom, we got married. I became a mom, and we moved to
mhm.
Colorado in '97. And in 1999, the Columbine, uh,
Yeah.
shootings happened. I was working as a hairdresser at the time, And now remember, I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life.
Right. Yeah.
um, I took a break from my client and I went into the back and turned on the little TV, and the coverage was on, and it was showing the kids in single file, all of the police officers, the ambulances, and everything. And as I watched it, I started having flashbacks,
Mhm.
and I became white as a ghost. I was sweating. I was
Yeah.
having a full-fledged panic attack. And none of my colleagues in Colorado knew my story. So they had no idea what was happening to me. And they were asking me questions like, well, you're too young to have kids in high school. So do you live there? Do you have friends that have kids there? Do you have neighbors that go there? You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
really trying to figure out what was happening. And I looked at her and I said, I don't know what's happening to me. Honestly, I have no idea. But I'm in a really bad place, so I just need some time. And what I was really good at, and I talk about this all the time, I was really good at putting on my emotional mask.
Mhm.
The mask that says I'm fine, I'm strong, I'm, well-rounded. I'm, this isn't gonna affect me. And I put that on and I went out and I did my clients and finished the day like nothing ever happened. Even though everyone around me was devastated about what happened, right?
Yeah.
And I walked out the door and all of those things came flooding back in. And I was having fantasies of driving off the road and
Mm.
all of those things, the anxiety, I was spiraling.
Mhm.
And my husband, being in tuned with me, knew something was not right. And it was a slippery slope. And now we have 2 children, right? So he came to me one day, he said, "You have 2 choices. You either get help on your own or I'm putting you in a hospital." And so, I was scared. I didn't wanna leave my kids,
Yeah.
but I didn't wanna be in this pain either. And so I did. I went to the doctor, and the doctor put me on antidepressants because that's what they do.
Yeah.
And then he looked at me and he said, "We need to get you into therapy." And I just looked at him like, "What? Like, that didn't help me 14 years ago. What makes you think it's gonna do it
Mhm.
now?"
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
he said, "Well, we have to find you someone," right? So he sent me to this woman. God, it was amazing because she was perfect. She specialized in PTSD. She specialized in severe trauma
Mhm.
and literally had a 5-minute conversation with her. She looked at me and she said, "Susan, everything you've gone through since you were 17 years old is normal because you have PTSD." And I was like, "I'm sorry, what? I didn't go to war. I'm not in the military,
Mhm.
I'm not a first responder, I'm not I'm not any of that." And she said, "Well, here's the thing. Anyone that goes through anything traumatic in their life can experience PTSD. But what you need to know is that PTSD doesn't go away. You can't cure it, but you
Mhm.
can manage it. So that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm going to help you with." And I swear the
Mhm.
sky opened up and rainbows shot out.
Yeah.
Because the first time in 14 years, I knew I wasn't crazy, that all of these things that were happening to me were happening because it was normal. My brain had been damaged.
Yeah.
So I had hope at that point, you know? But at the same time, I had been struggling with this for so many years that she didn't want to like throw the arsenal of things at me yet. right? So we started out with something as simple as journaling.
Mhm.
And when I talk about journaling, when she first brought it up, I thought, oh, that's like such wishy washy stuff. Like, really? And the reason we talked about it is because I wasn't sleeping. I hadn't slept in like a full night in years.
Yeah.
And when you don't get proper rest, it affects your mental health. You get brain fog, all of that stuff. It increases depression. If you really are extra tired, then the anxiety comes into play. So it's just a slippery slope of mental things that happen to you. So she said, I want you to journal before you go to bed. So all the things that are swirling around in your head, I want you to get that out. And it doesn't matter how you do it. Like you can write it down, you can put it in music,
Mhm.
you can do an art piece, draw, paint, whatever it is to get whatever it is out of your head. And for me, I've always kind of been a writer,
Mhm.
not knowing that, but I've always been kind of a writer. And so I started journaling at night. And what I was finding is that when I didn't have all that stuff swirling in my head, I was able to sleep. So it was a tangible result
Yeah,
for me.
you saw
I
progress in
s
yourself for the
I
first time. Yeah.
saw it, which gave me hope because then I was like, "Okay, this modality worked," you know? And then we started going into attacking all of the things that would happen. So my anxiety, she started talking to me about tapping techniques and affirmations and utilizing breath work. And so she just moved me into these things very slowly, because it doesn't happen overnight. And then when I became strong enough in her mind to be able to move into the EMDR
Mhm.
or cognitive therapies, uh, that's what we did. But it didn't happen till many years later. And she didn't do EMDR. She sent me to somebody. And I did, probably 2, 3 sessions of that. I wish I would have continued. Um, but at that point, I felt like there were other things that I could do that was going to be beneficial. I had no idea that writing a book was gonna be the best thing I ever did for like, better than therapy, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, the most cathartic thing that you could do to
Yeah.
turn your pain into something that was healing and helpful for others too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for so many years, I felt like I was stuffing all of this away for many reasons. If I talked about it, then it would at that point, if I talked about it, then it would hurt my mom or it would hurt my brother or, it was too much for them. Um, but at the same time, it was like people needed to know and people had an idea or of a story in their own head about me,
Right.
about how I should react, how I should be, how I whatever, right? And I got to the point where I was like, nope. People I want people to know me for me and know my story instead of the one that's in their brain, their head.
Mhm.
Um, I want people to know who I am authentically.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. And I was thinking about how you were saying it took a while for the media to bring you into the story. So, like applying like that like little piece to it too of like feeling like your importance within the story, that it is your story and you're able to share like it
yeah.
for yourself.
And
Yeah.
that followed me for years,
Yeah.
honestly. It really did. Um, there was and I'll talk about this very much, but there was a TV movie that was made in 93. And It's called The Price of Vengeance. And I was a part of that movie. I was a creative consultant on it. So was my mother and a family friend who was also in the media. And at the end, when we went to see before it was put on TV, we went to the screening of it and we watched the entire movie. And at the end, on those made for TV movies, they usually tell you what happens to the real people.
Yeah.
So at the time, they talked about my mother, they talked about my brother, they talked about the guy who actually killed my father, and Susan was nowhere to be found.
Oh,
So I sat there and I was like, "Are you kidding me right now?"
mm,
I I had I wanted people to know that I had married and I had this beautiful child and, I had moved on and nope. And so it really hurt.
yeah.
I called the production company and I said, "You know what? That's not okay." Right? And they were like, "Oh, it's too late to do any changes. So we'll just give you credits as a creative consultant." And, what am I going to say? I said,
Mm,
"Oh, okay. That's fine." But again, it just kind of reiterated that feeling of me, yes, that's my story, my legacy, but at the same time, it was like, but you're not that important.
mm. Ah, yes, but you are, and now you have a book and you're able to
I
share that
do.
your
Yeah.
story, yeah, very authentically.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I just felt like for other reasons too. I mean, I wrote the book because there's still so much, even 38 years later, there's still so much hurt and pain around my dad's murder. He was the first officer in the annals of LAPD who was actually assassinated for doing their job. And it really made a huge impact on a lot of men and women on the force. And so I felt like maybe if they read my book and they saw the resiliency side
Mhm.
of me, that it would bring them some hope and some healing. And um so it did. It gave me hope that my book would be able to do that for people. And I've had conversations with some of these men and women who were either on the force at that time or they were in they knew my dad, they worked with him, they were trained with him, whatever. And and they thank me for writing the book, and that just quantifies my, reasoning, of why I wanted to write it for them as well. So,
Yeah. How did you find the courage to show up authentically and share your story?
my purpose, plain and simple.
Yeah.
I found my purpose. I feel like when people go through things that are really horrific and they're able to heal through it. And obviously, I wrote a book and all of that. I'm not done yet by any means. Like, healing is an ever evolving thing, right? However, I think you get to a point in your healing where you realize that you can help others in their journey. Um, it's almost like, and I laugh when I say this, but it's kind of like cliff notes to healing. It's taking out some parts for some people or some struggles for some people, you know? And and that became my purpose of giving people hope
Mhm.
that you can heal no matter what you go through. And my trauma is worse than anyone else's. Everybody's trauma is their trauma. I can't begin to understand how other people feel. I know how I feel, but I wouldn't, I wouldn't say that I know how you feel because I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're taking your experience and you're teaching people what you are learning and what you have learned and giving them a resource that you did
Yep,
not have when you were searching.
absolutely. Absolutely. Because, there's people that are walking around on this earth who, for instance, maybe they had childhood trauma, right? And it was generational.
Mhm.
So they feel like what they experienced as a kid was normal. It wasn't trauma, but yet they're struggling in their life with relationships, with whatever, right? So, and I've met these people. I've met some people who have gone through horrific things that thought that that was normal because that's what the parent was telling them. And, that's how you show love. And that's how, you know what I mean? It blows my mind. And so I feel like, uh, if I can help other people heal, and, like I said, healing is ever evolving, but there are people that are walking around with all this hurt and
Mhm.
pain and nowhere to put it, or don't know the first step to take, or maybe they're afraid, and again fear comes into it, right? So they're afraid of knowing the truth or feeling the truth, or
Yeah.
and so I want people to understand that the human condition, we do not run into pain. That is not a normal human condition, right? We want to stay in pleasure land,
Yeah.
everything that
Mm.
makes us happy. The problem is that if you don't dive into the pain, if you don't work through it, bulldoze your fear, work through the pain, you don't find the healing. And if you really want the relationships, even with your own self, you have to do the work. And I preach this all the time because I tell my kids this. I have adult children now. I tell my adult kids this, their friends this,
Mhm.
that yes, it sucks. I'm not going to lie. It is not an easy thing to dive into your pain, but the freedom from it on the other side, and being able to take your power back from whatever it was that hurt you, is priceless. And in doing that, you find a purpose. You find something that drives you forward. And it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It is a process. And you've got to find, there's no one size fits all either. You got to find one, a professional that you connect with, that you feel safe to be vulnerable with in order to do the healing. If you don't, the healing will not occur. And so it's really important, and I feel like because of my experiences in the past is how and why I this is my message, that this is why I speak, because I think it's a really important message for people to understand. One, they're not alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. You may feel alone. Believe me, I've been there. I get that part, right? Um, Feeling like a one man on an island all by yourself, but you're not. And sometimes, I didn't have the parental, you know, support system. I had to find my other support myself.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, I had to be a little bit vulnerable.
Mhm.
Um, but you can do it no matter what your situation is. There and now, thank God, there's resources.
Yeah.
So you can find, the other side of that is that in conversations that I've had with people who have said, "Oh, therapy doesn't work for me." And I ask them why. Why didn't it work? Well, all they did is sit around and talk to me. And I said, "Well, there's your first problem. You're the one that should be talking, and they're the ones that should be asking you questions in order to make you talk, like, you know what I mean? So, if they're not doing that, you're not feeling comfortable, you're not feeling safe, you're not feeling heard, then move on."
Yeah, that safety piece is super important. It's like the first, like, anchor that you must have in order to be able to
Just
be
like a
supported.
doctor,
Yeah.
like a
Mhm.
doctor. If you don't feel comfortable talking to a doctor about whatever it is that's going on in your body, s- this is a part of your body, it's your brain, right? It's your
Mhm.
mind. And it's a very important organ. So, it's really important for you to be able to feel safe and feel supported and feel like you're actually being guided through, like your therapist is alongside you on this journey, and they're going to catch you, right? If you feel like you're going out of control or this is too much, right? They're going to know. And so, that's a really important piece. I feel like there's a lot of people that just go to the therapy that their insurance tells them to go to or, whatever, but they're
Mhm.
working for you. This is your investment in your own life. So, interview your
Mhm.
therapist. There's
Yeah.
there's an idea. Can they handle? Are they educated enough? Do you feel confident that they can come alongside you and work through this together? Interview them.
Yeah.
If you don't feel that safety net, if you don't feel that you can be vulnerable with this person, move on. And it's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. It has to be a good fit.
Yeah. Just like any kind of relationship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. If it's not a good fit, you're not going to heal,
Yeah.
or it's going to take forever. You know what I mean? Because it's like pulling teeth, right? So, yeah, I mean, I look at my past experience and I think that's the most important thing. I mean, the person that I met that was totally qualified, knew exactly what to do for me, but didn't rush me through stuff. Like,
Yeah.
really started baby steps with me. And if you're out there and you're listening to this and you feel like, well, I really do want to heal, but I don't know where to start, just start.
Mhm.
Do some research, figure out whatever trauma you've gone through, or if it's loss, look at grief counseling and, people like that. Um, but whatever it is that you have experienced in your life, make sure that that person is qualified. And if they are, go see them, you know?
Mhm.
In 5 minutes, you'll know. 5 minutes of talking to somebody, you'll know if you're connected to them
Yeah. Just
or not.
be curious and take that first step.
Just be curious. Exactly. Take that first step.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom and having that be your purpose, I think is going to help a lot of people.
Well, I hope so. I do a lot of these podcasts and, my message is the same. I'm just, this is bigger than me. The
Mhm.
universe is using me Um, I feel like the universe uses a lot of people who have gone through a lot of things in order to teach, in order to support, in order to show hope and be able to tell people that it's okay. And um, you're not broken. You may feel broken,
Yeah.
but you're not broken. And so um I will tell you that I think the biggest lesson for me in writing this book too was um I I wasn't sure what the book did for me. I mean, I knew what the book did for me, and it made me realize a lot of things. That it really opened my eyes. I have a chapter called Rose-Colored Glasses, and it's because for so many years, even in therapy, I could not see straight. I could not recognize the relationships around me that were not healthy, that were toxic, that I spent a lot of time making excuses for, right? And after writing the book and really diving in and reading it over and over in the editing portion of doing the book, um, I realized that that's where the self-worth comes from.
Mhm.
And what I realized is that I have been making excuses. I have been, you know, making or allowing people to make me feel less than for very many years. And I have my eyes open now. And so I recognize when things are unhealthy around me and I do something about it now. And
Mhm.
so for me right now, I mean, uh the one relationship that I basically put it out there, it was either gonna blow it up or it was gonna start a conversation, was with my mother.
Yeah.
And my mother read the book, and all she could see was that I talked about her drinking. And being a narcissistic personality, she couldn't see all the pain and the hurt that I talked about that I went through. And
Mm.
so she chose to stop talking to me, and we no longer have a relationship. Here's the thing I can say about that. Again, I spent many, many years in a narcissistic relationship with a woman who I had a fantasy that she was going to wake up one day and be a Hallmark movie mom. And I had to let go of that fantasy. I had to let go of it and realize that that was never going to happen. And I don't have control over that. So, what I need to do is I need to protect my peace. And so, when she chose not to speak to me anymore, I was okay with it. I felt like this was the universe telling me it's okay. And you need to protect your peace. And a lot of people, and I don't know if you've gone through the same thing, but a lot of people who have been in my boat, and I didn't even realize that I had a narcissistic parent until I wrote the book. And then I was like, wow, holy cow. It was like someone opened up the window.
I can relate to you
Can
so
you
much right
relate?
now.
Okay. Well,
Um,
and a lot of people can. And I will tell you, like in the very beginning, I thought, is it okay that I'm okay?
Mhm.
Um, and you know what? I am. It is. I have that part is peaceful for me.
Mhm.
My brother still struggles with it. He really does. And, he's going to do what he's going to do, and that's totally fine. Right. He and I are very close. He's had a rough life, and he's he's been in trouble in the past and whatever, but right now as an adult, he's on his journey of healing, and but he's doing all the positive things in his life. He just married the love of his life in June. He's a stepdad. He's got a
Mhm.
beautiful daughter, a biological daughter, and I'm really proud of him. We both grew up in the same house with the same person. And so for me to be able to walk away is a little weird for him, right? And that's okay. That's totally fine. I'm not going to be like, you need to stop having a relationship with mom. No, it's totally up to him what he wants to do. And I'm okay with that, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, I'm doing for me what I need to do for me to stay peaceful. And, you know, I, I'm in the firm belief that when people show you who they are, believe them. Right? She's been showing me who she is for years and years and years and years and years, and I've never
Yeah.
believed her.
Yeah, and your book brought you that peace by asking that question and getting an
It did.
answer, so
It
yeah.
did. I mean, even down to I had a conversation with her before the book went live. And out of respect, you know, for 4.5 years of writing the book, she never asked. She never asked me, "What are you writing about? What's the book about? What's the title? What's the this?" It was always my brother prodding her into asking questions, so like parents that are generally interested would ask along the way, or, maybe try to help in some sort of way, piecing things together, whatever it is, right? I didn't have that. And so right before the book came out, I sat down with her and I had to tell myself this: when you're sitting with a narcissistic person, you, even though, like, I knew that parts of my book were going to be hurtful, and I had to be empathetic to that. But at the same time, I couldn't let her gaslight me. I was not going to engage in that conversation, right? So when I went and I sat down with her, that was the mindset I had. We're going to talk about what's in the book, but I'm not going to allow her to engage me in that behavior.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not going to let her make me feel like I'm less than.
For the first time, you've created boundaries for yourself in that
Absolutely.
situation, yeah.
Yep. I had a little help, but I, sat down and I said, there's things in this book, Mom, that are going to be hard for you to read. And I wasn't just talking about her part. I was talking about her knowing for the first time that I wanted to end my life multiple times in my life, and that I had severe anxiety, and that I had panic attacks, and I had depression, and I had all these things, that kept me from really living for many years, like really living. And so I told her, I said, I do talk about your drinking, but I talk about it in the way of how my experience was when you did. I talk about the abandonment issue,
Mhm.
feeling abandoned, and how I felt like I wasn't important, and how you lost your identity. And I felt like I not only lost my dad, but I lost my mom
Mhm.
in some sort of way. And so, we talked about generational abuse because I talk about it in my book. She was abused by my grandmother. My grandmother was abused by her mother, right? But I had to make the change. The buck stopped with me when I had kids. And when I left the conversation, I felt like she heard me, but she didn't. So when I delivered the book to her, I wrote her a note and I said, everybody deals with their trauma journey differently. And I've loved you through yours. And I was genuine about that. You know, I have loved her through hers.
Mhm.
Um, and she put it down with her mail and went about her day. And I was like, okay, whatever, you know. And about 45 minutes later, I got a call from her and she said, I read the first two chapters of your book. Good job. It was really well written. I'm really proud of you. But you didn't go with that neighbor. You went with the other neighbor. I
Oh,
was like, oh my Lord,
oh,
right?
that sounds so familiar.
And I said, uh-huh, okay, mom, whatever, you know, you do you. And she said she was proud of me. And I thought, okay, in this moment, I am going to accept that, but you're not done with the book. So the jury's kind of all, it's still out, right? So, but in that moment, I took the, I'm proud of you. And I was like, thank you, you know. But she did finish the book and then she stopped talking to me. So again, you know, that was a fear in the very beginning, that this would blow up our relationship, what was left of it. But what I realized is that we really didn't have a relationship. You don't have a relationship with a narcissistic person. They think you have a relationship. They think, you know, she thinks I know that like she puts out, I know how she internally she probably doesn't feel this way, but she puts out that she is the most supportive, nurturing, loving mom. Behind the scenes, not so much, right? And that was the scary part about her narcissistic personality because she can put out this one
Mhm.
persona and then be a totally different person to her own children.
Mm, yeah.
So it's very interesting. But, you know, again, I, you know, her life is her life and she just made the choices that she's made in her life. And um, I wish it had been a little bit different, but it is what it is. And, um, you know, we're all given things in life and challenges in life. And I, you know, I chose to rise up. I chose to say, I'm not, I'm not going to treat my kids the way that I was treated. I'm going to respect my kids for being the individuals that they are. Um, I am genuinely proud of my children.
Mhm.
I also recognize that they're not perfect,
Mhm.
as am I. I am not perfect either, and I would not pretend to be. But yeah, I mean, if anything, that was one of the things that I wanted my kids to learn from me is being authentic
Yeah.
and living an authentic life and learning to be proud of who you are. And, you know, and I just, I feel like there's so many people and in this world is just crazy that there's so many people walking around with so much hurt and pain. And I know this is cliche, but hurt people hurt people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the really interesting thing about you giving that book to your mom and her not like really having a relationship with you after is that she could probably like use the information that you're providing people for healing in that book, like, more than anyone.
right? But she didn't get that.
Yeah.
That was not that's not what she got out of it.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate, because in a way, yes, I did write that book for her.
Mhm.
I did write so that she could see who her daughter really is authentically, even though she never asked, never wanted to know, never had an interest in knowing who I really am. In our world, I felt like, and I used to say this to people all the time, it was, I felt like I was on some kind of competition with her about who is the better person. And I'll give you an example. I do what I do because it's who I am. So I'm with Keller Williams. I'm also a realtor. And Keller Williams is a very big company about mindset. And they have a training called Bold. And Bold changed my life, literally changed my life. And um, as I was taking one of my Bold courses, um, we send affirmations to ourselves every day for 7 weeks. And they can be motivational sayings. We have bold laws, which, they're kind of laws of the world, but, you know, we send those to ourselves. And when I talked to my adult children at the time, um, they were like, oh, we want those. And I said, okay. So every morning at 8 a.m., I would send them all a text with these affirmations or motivational sayings or whatever. And I did this for 7 weeks as I was in this training. And I asked the kids, does it make a difference for you when you get my text in the morning? And they said, absolutely. It changes my whole mindset for the day. Like it starts me out on a good note.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, that's great. That's awesome. That's what it's supposed to do, right? So I I'm telling my mom this story just because she's my mom and I wanted to tell her. And she says, "Stop. Wait till you hear what I did." And then she would go into something that she did for someone else and whatever. And I would sit there and go, I just don't get this. This is not a normal interaction with a child and a parent. And I had many of these conversations with her. And every time I had that conversation, I came away from it going, what just happened? So, it was a big epiphany for me. I feel like it was a victory for me because I, for the first time, felt like I was taking my own internal power back from my own mother, who for so many years made me feel less than. And I spent so many years thinking, if I do this, she'll be proud of me. If I do this, she's going to love me more. If I do that, you know what I mean? And it was all about that Hallmark
Mhm.
movie fantasy. And when you have the reality of this is who she is innately, it's not changing.
Yeah.
That's when I knew I could move on and
Mhm.
I could be peaceful with it.
Yeah.
So once you've stretched, you're like a rubber band, right?
Mhm.
Once you've stretched yourself emotionally, you can't go backwards. It doesn't happen. You've moved on. You've become stronger. You've become wiser. you've become resilient. And, and that's what I want for people. That's what I want for other people.
Yeah. So how can people find your book? Where can they?
My book is on Amazon. It is in paperback form, and it is also on Kindle. If you're on Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Um, I am working on the audiobook.
Mhm.
Um, my hope is to be able to do it the first quarter of this year, and I am doing it myself,
Excellent.
reading my own book.
Yeah.
Um, at first I wasn't going to do that. I was going to hire an actor, and everybody was like, "Oh no, you need to do your own book." So I'm going to do my own book following everybody else's suggestion. Um, if you want to contact me, if you just need someone to talk to, or um, you know, a brain to pick or whatever, I do have a website. It's susansnowspeaks.com, and there is a part there where you can send in an information, your information with your email address. I'd be more than happy to get back with you and chat. You know, I am a coach. I'm a resiliency coach. So, if you want a free, um, just kind of a consultation to see if that's something, maybe you've been in therapy, but you don't know where to start, I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well. Um, I am on Instagram under my name, and I do have a YouTube channel. It's Susan Snow Speaks. And I mean, you can get a hold of me all different ways.
Yeah. I'll put all
Uh,
of these links into the show notes so people can click on them really easily too.
awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I have one last question that I ask my guests before we wrap up.
sure.
And that is, if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
Oh my gosh. Wow. I think it's my tagline: bulldoze your fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely 100%. Anytime I say that, it starts a conversation with somebody
Mhm.
because they go, "What do you mean?"
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I'm able to dive into that.
Yeah. It's great. I think we should get some t-shirts made.
I might, you never know.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story and your wisdom. And I'm sure it's going to reach a lot of people and help people through their healing journey. Absolutely. So,
Oh, I would be so grateful for that, for sure.
yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tuned in to you.